Thick snowflakes battered against the plate glass window of the Old Oak Diner, but inside, Maya Robinson was secretly pouring her meager tip change into a glass jar labeled Lily's Bike. It was 7:15 p.m. on Christmas Eve in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, and the diner was bustling with the kind of chaotic warmth that only the holidays could bring. The smell of roasted meatloaf and cinnamon hung heavy in the air, mixing with the crooning voice of Bing Crosby drifting from the vintage jukebox in the corner. Maya wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, adjusting her red festive apron. Her feet ached from a double shift, but every time she glanced at the jar hidden beneath the counter, she found a new reserve of energy. She needed exactly $40 more to buy that pink bicycle her 8-year-old daughter had been whispering about for months. "More coffee, Arthur?" Maya asked softly, approaching table number 4. In the corner sat Arthur Miller, a frail man in his 70s, wrapped in a faded, threadbare parka that looked like it had seen better decades, let alone days. He was shivering slightly, though whether from the draft near the door or simply from age, Maya couldn't tell. She didn't wait for an answer. She poured the steaming black liquid into his mug, filling it to the brim. Then, with a quick, covert glance to ensure her manager, Jerry, wasn't looking, she slid a plate of warm apple pie a la mode onto his table. "Merry Christmas, Arthur." "This one's on the house," she whispered with a wink, though in reality, she would pay for it out of her own tips later. Arthur looked up, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're too good to a useless old man, Maya," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "Nonsense," she replied, patting his shoulder. "You're the best customer I have." Suddenly, the front door swung open violently, letting in a blast of freezing wind and swirling snow that silenced the jukebox for a split second. A man in an immaculate cashmere coat and Italian leather shoes strode in, shaking the snow off his shoulders with an exaggerated grimace of disgust. It was Brad Sterling, the local real estate mogul whose face was plastered on half the bus benches in town. Hanging on his arm was a woman in a fur coat, looking equally unimpressed by the rustic charm of the diner. "Jerry," Brad barked, snapping his fingers as if summoning a dog. "I booked the VIP booth. Why is there a line? And why does it smell like cheap grease in here?" Jerry, the manager, scurried over, wringing his hands nervously. "Mr. Sterling. So sorry, the booth is, well, the heating vent is broken there. I have a nice table by the window ready for you." He gestured frantically toward table number 5, directly next to Arthur. Brad scanned the room, his lip curling into a sneer as his gaze landed on the old man in the tattered coat slurping his coffee. "You expect me to eat my Christmas dinner next to that?" Brad asked, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "He looks like he just crawled out of a dumpster. He's ruining my appetite." The diner went quiet. Arthur paused, his spoon hovering halfway to his mouth, but he didn't say a word. He just lowered his head. Maya tightened her grip on the serving tray, took a deep breath to steady herself, and walked toward Brad's table, unaware that she was about to face the worst nightmare of her life. Maya is about to walk into a nightmare, but you won't want to miss what happens next. If you are still watching and finding value in this story, please comment the number 8 below to let me know you are here with us. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend you subscribe to Black Brilliance and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Your support is what helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you every day. Now, let's continue. "Hey you, are you going to stand there staring forever? I need a clean menu, grease-free." Brad's voice hissed like a razor on glass, cutting through the festive chatter of the diner. Maya blinked, snapping out of her daze, and quickly grabbed a fresh laminated menu from her apron pocket. She wiped it down with a cloth before handing it to him, her hands trembling slightly. Brad snatched it from her grip, holding it by the very edge as if it were contaminated waste. "I suppose basic standards are too much to ask for in a place like this," he muttered to his companion Tiffany, who was busy scrolling on her phone, completely ignoring the drama. "Bring us a bottle of your most expensive Cabernet. And try to wash your hands before you touch the glasses. I know hygiene isn't exactly a priority in the neighborhood you commute from." The insult was subtle but sharp, aimed directly at her skin color and her background. Maya bit her lip, tasting iron, but nodded politely. "Right away, sir." At the adjacent table, Arthur stopped eating. He lowered his fork slowly to the plate with a deliberate, metallic clink. He didn't turn around, but his posture shifted. The slump of a tired old man was replaced by the rigid alertness of someone preparing for a fight. He took a slow sip of coffee, his eyes narrowing as he watched Brad's reflection in the dark window pane. The Silent Night, playing on the jukebox, felt ironically cruel as the tension in the room began to thicken. When Maya returned with the wine and 2 polished glasses, Brad was already scanning the room for his next target. His eyes landed on Arthur, who was scraping the last bit of apple filling from his plate. Unbelievable, Brad scoffed loudly, making sure the entire room could hear him. Hey, old-timer. If you're that hungry, I'm sure there are plenty of leftovers in the dumpster out back. Why don't you do us all a favor and go eat there? You're ruining the aesthetic for the paying customers. Young man, have some respect. The sharp voice came from the booth behind them. Mrs. Higgins, a retired schoolteacher with a reputation for brook no-nonsense, glared at Brad over her spectacles. She slammed her spoon down into her pea soup. That man has more dignity in his little finger than you have in that entire expensive suit. Brad swiveled around, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Shut up, you old hag. Nobody asked for your opinion. Go back to your knitting and let the adults talk. The cruelty of the remark hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Maya felt a surge of heat rise in her chest. She had endured the insults directed at her because she needed this job. She needed that bike for Lily. But seeing him attack Mrs. Higgins and Arthur, 2 of the kindest people she knew, was too much. Mr. Sterling, Maya said, her voice shaking but her chin held high. You can speak to me however you like, but please do not insult my customers. Mr. Arthur is a gentleman, and he has every right to be here. The diner went dead silent. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. Brad slowly stood up, towering over Maya. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched collar. He picked up his full glass of red wine, swirling the dark liquid menacingly, a twisted smile curling his lips. A gentleman? You think you can lecture me? He took a step closer, invading her personal space. Let me teach you exactly where your place is in this world. Crash! The sound of shattering crystal cut through the air, louder than any gunshot, silencing the holiday music instantly. A dark, blood-red stain exploded across the front of Brad's pristine white shirt, dripping down onto the checkered floor. But Maya hadn't tripped. She hadn't stumbled. The whole room had watched in paralyzed horror as Brad deliberately jerked his wrist forward, dashing the contents of the glass onto his own chest before dropping the stemware to the floor. Look what you did. Brad roared, his voice shaking with a terrifyingly convincing performance of outrage. You clumsy, incompetent idiot. You threw wine on me. Maya froze, her hands empty and shaking in midair. No. You. She stammered, but the words died in her throat. Jerry, the manager, burst out from the kitchen, wiping his sweaty hands on his trousers. His face went pale as he took in the scene. The broken glass, the stained expensive suit of his most important VIP client, and the thunderous expression on Brad Sterling's face. Jerry's mind didn't process truth. It processed fear. He remembered Brad's threat from last month about pulling the lucrative company holiday banquet contract if things weren't perfect. Mr. Sterling. Oh my God, I am so sorry. Jerry rushed forward, grabbing napkins and dabbing uselessly at Brad's lapel. Brad shoved him away. Sorry isn't going to fix a $3,000 custom suit, Jerry. I want this woman out of here. No. I want her gone, or I will sue this dump into oblivion. Jerry spun around to face Maya, his eyes desperate and hard. Maya, pack your things. You're done. But Jerry, Maya pleaded, tears finally spilling over, hot and stinging on her cheeks. I didn't do it. He threw it on himself. Please, it's Christmas Eve. I need this shift. Lily's bike. I don't care. Jerry snapped, his voice cracking under the pressure. You're fired. Get out. And don't expect your last paycheck, it's going towards the dry cleaning bill. The injustice of it hit Maya like a physical blow. She looked around the diner, pleading silently for help, but people looked away, afraid to intervene in the wrath of a man like Brad Sterling. Broken, she reached behind her back to untie the knot of her red festive apron. Her fingers fumbled with the fabric, her dignity lying in shards on the floor alongside the wine glass. She placed the apron on the counter, her head bowed in defeat, and turned toward the door, ready to walk out into the freezing snow and a future that had just gone dark. But she didn't make it to the door. A hand, weather-beaten, calloused, but surprisingly strong, clamped gently around her wrist. It was Arthur. Slowly, methodically, the old man stood up from table number 4. But he didn't struggle to rise as he usually did. He stood up smoothly, his spine straightening, his shoulders squaring. He seemed to grow 3 inches taller in a matter of seconds. The frailty was gone, replaced by a dormant power that suddenly filled the room. He didn't look at Jerry. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight at Maya, his eyes burning with an intense, blue fire. "Pick up that apron, Maya," Arthur said, his voice rolling through the diner like distant thunder, deep and commanding. "Put it back on. The only person leaving this building tonight is the man wearing the wine-stained shirt." Arthur has finally stood up, and the tide is about to turn. If you are still watching and find value in this detailed story, please comment the number 3 below to let me know you are here. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend you subscribe to Black Brilliance and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Your support helps us continue creating amazing content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's continue. Brad Sterling threw his head back and let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed uncomfortably against the diner's tiled walls. "You? Kick me out." He looked around the room, inviting everyone to share in the joke. "Did you hear that? The old hobo thinks he's the sheriff. Did you forget to take your meds today, Grandpa? Or are you just looking for a free ride to the nursing home?" Arthur didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He simply pulled back the cuff of his tattered parka to reveal a watch that seemed incongruously expensive, a vintage Patek Philippe that glinted under the fluorescent lights. He glanced at the dial. 7:30, he murmured. Right on time. As if on cue, the diner door swung open again. But this time, the wind didn't seem to dare disturb the person who entered. A woman in her early 40s, sharp as a tack and dressed in a tailored wool coat that cost more than Jerry's car, stepped inside. She shook the snow from her shoulders with practiced elegance and marched straight past the stunned crowd to table number 4. In her hand was a leather briefcase embossed with a gold logo that Brad recognized instantly. He had seen it on the rejection letters from his bank loans. It was the crest of Miller Holdings. "Grandpa, looks like your social worker is here," Brad sneered, though his voice wavered slightly. The woman ignored him completely. She stopped in front of Arthur and bowed her head respectfully. "Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the delay. The roads were worse than expected." She placed the briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The transfer of ownership was finalized with the bank 10 minutes ago. The deed to this building, along with the acquisition of the distressed debt portfolio including Mr. Sterling's construction firm, is now officially under your name. Brad's smirk vanished. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he might faint. "Miller," he choked out, his eyes darting between the woman and the old man in the dirty coat. "Arthur Miller? The billionaire investor." Arthur slowly peeled off the ragged parka, revealing a crisp, clean button-down shirt underneath. He stood straight, radiating an authority that made the diner feel suddenly very small. He picked up a thick folder from the briefcase and tossed it casually onto the table in front of Brad. It landed with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel striking a block. "That's correct," Arthur said, his voice calm but icy. "And according to these papers, I don't just own the roof over your head right now, Mr. Sterling. I own the loans you've defaulted on 3 times this year. I own your overdue mortgage. Effectively, I own you." Brad scrambled to grab the folder, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. His eyes widened in horror as he saw the signatures and the stamps. "No, this can't be. I didn't know," he stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead despite the chill. "Sir, I didn't know it was you." Arthur took a step closer, his blue eyes piercing right through Brad's panic. "I prefer a quiet atmosphere when I enjoy my apple pie, Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But you made the biggest mistake of your life tonight. You thought your money gave you the right to treat people like dirt. Now you're finding out that money is a tool, and in the wrong hands, it's a weapon. and I don't tolerate bigots weaponizing wealth on my property. This is just a huge misunderstanding. Mr. Miller, please, I didn't know it was you. Brad stammered, his voice cracking. The arrogance that had filled the room just minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, cringing desperation. He reached out as if to touch Arthur's arm, but retracted his hand when the older man shot him a withering look. I have the utmost respect for you, sir. I was having a bad day. You know how it is, right? Business stress. From the booth behind them, Mrs. Higgins cleared her throat loudly. You were certainly loud enough a minute ago, young man. I didn't hear any respect when you were shouting at that poor girl. Several other customers murmured in agreement, the tide of the room turning completely against the man in the wine-stained shirt. Arthur didn't even look at the crowd. He kept his eyes locked on Brad. You're not apologizing because you're sorry, Mr. Sterling. You're apologizing because you just realized I have more money than you. And that is exactly why you are not fit to do business with my firm. Arthur closed the folder on the table with a finality that made Brad jump. I'm calling the bank in the morning. We're calling in all your loans immediately. If you can't pay, and looking at these financials, I know you can't. Your company belongs to me by noon tomorrow. Brad stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He turned desperately to Jerry, the manager, who was cowering near the kitchen door. Jerry, tell him I'm a good customer. Arthur's gaze shifted to the manager. Jerry flinched. And you, Arthur said, his voice calm but laced with disappointment. A manager's job is to protect his staff, not to sell their dignity for a holiday banquet contract. You watched him humiliate Maya, and you helped him do it. Arthur gestured to Sarah, his assistant. Sarah, arrange a severance package. Jerry, you're relieved of your duties effective immediately. Pack your things. Jerry's knees buckled. In trying to save a client, he had lost his career. The diner was dead silent as Arthur turned back to Brad and pointed a long, bony finger toward the exit. Now, get out of my restaurant. Before I have the police escort you out for trespassing. Brad looked around for support, but he found only cold stares. Even his girlfriend Tiffany had seen enough. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked past him without a word. Tiffany? Wait, Brad called out, but she pushed the door open and disappeared into the snow, the engine of her car revving to life seconds later. Defeated, humiliated, and stripped of his power, Brad hung his head. He walked to the door, the sound of his expensive Italian shoes on the tiles now sounding like a retreat. As the door clicked shut behind him, the diner erupted into spontaneous applause. Mrs. Higgins clapped the loudest. The tension broke. The warmth returned to the room. Arthur slowly turned around, his stern expression softening into a gentle smile as he faced Maya. She was still standing there, clutching her apron, tears of shock and relief streaming down her face. Maya, Arthur said softly, his blue eyes twinkling with kindness. Could you brew a fresh pot? My coffee has gone cold, and I believe we have a lot to discuss about your future. The bell above the door jingled, but this time it didn't herald a freezing gust of wind. Instead, the bright, golden sunshine of a Pennsylvania July spilled into the room, accompanied by the cheerful laughter of children playing outside. The diner looked different now. The dark, moody lighting was gone, replaced by airy curtains and vases of fresh wildflowers on every table. And above the counter, a new hand-painted wooden sign read, Maya's Kitchen. Maya stood behind the register, not in a stained apron, but in a smart blazer, checking the lunch receipts. She glanced out the window where a shiny new pink bicycle was leaning against the patio railing. Her daughter Lily was sitting on the steps, eating an ice cream cone, her face glowing with a joy that had been absent 6 months ago. At table number 4, now permanently reserved with a small brass plaque, Arthur sat enjoying his usual coffee. He looked healthier, happier, and was currently showing photos of his grandkids to Mrs. Higgins. A heavy sanitation truck rumbled to a halt outside, its brakes hissing in the summer heat. A man hopped off the back, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag. He wore a neon yellow safety vest over a gray work uniform that was stained with grime and sweat. He walked into the diner, keeping his head low, trying not to draw attention to himself. He approached the counter and cleared his throat. "Just a cold bottle of water, please," he muttered, digging into his pocket for loose change. It was Brad Sterling. The arrogance was gone, scrubbed away by months of hard labor. His face was gaunt, and the hands that once held crystal wine glasses were now rough and calloused. He placed 3 crumpled dollar bills on the counter, refusing to make eye contact. Maya froze for a second. The memory of that freezing Christmas Eve flashed in her mind, the humiliation, the fear, the wine on the floor. She looked at the man who had tried to destroy her life. He looked tired, broken. She could have refused him service. She could have told him to eat from the dumpster, just as he had told Arthur. But Maya looked over at Arthur, who was watching them quietly, and then out at Lily, who was waving at a passing neighbor. Maya picked up the crumpled bills and slid them gently back across the counter toward him. She reached into the cooler, pulled out a large bottle of water, and added a fresh turkey sandwich from the display case. Brad looked up, startled. I didn't order the sandwich. I can't afford. It's on the house, Brad," Maya said softly, her voice devoid of malice. "It's a hot day out there. You need your strength." Brad stared at her, his eyes welling up with tears he tried desperately to hide. He recognized her now, not as the servant he had mocked, but as the owner who showed him mercy he didn't deserve. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Thank you, ma'am." He took the food and walked out, not with the swagger of a king, but with the quiet gratitude of a man who had finally learned the value of $1 and a kind word. Maya watched him drive away. She walked out from behind the counter and went to the window, watching Lily pedal her pink bike down the sunlit street. She realized then that Arthur was right. True power wasn't about stepping on others to get to the top. It was about climbing up and then reaching a hand down to lift others up with you. Just like the winter snow melting into a warm summer, Brad's arrogance eventually dissolved into humility, while Maya's quiet kindness bloomed into the life she always deserved. This story reminds us that true nobility isn't found in expensive suits or bank accounts, but in the gentle act of respecting every soul we meet, regardless of their cover. If this tale warmed your heart, please share this light with a friend and join our Black Brilliance family for more stories where character always conquers prejudice.